This happened sometime about maybe when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I still get goosebumps every time when I think of this. Now, this was before my parents had split. My dad was working at a tow truck company, and he was working while my mom was out doing errands. My brother and I were home alone, and I was just playing on my PlayStation 2, playing Mortal Kombat, when all of a sudden I looked outside to see that there was someone or something outside the house. It was standing in the middle of the road, so I was confused as to why it was in the middle of the road. I got my glasses on and took a closer look. I realized that it was a man, but I didn't know him, and this way really confused me, as why was he standing in the middle of the road? Of course, there was nobody out, as it was probably around sunset, and I started to think that maybe this guy had some really bad intentions. He kind of looked up at another window. He didn't recognize me though. Then he walked over towards my front door. I went downstairs and grabbed the phone to call the police. As soon as I called the police, the man was gone by the time the police arrived at my house. But then it happened again the next day, and there was still nothing. The police patrolled the area when they couldn't find the guy, but since then he had not returned. I still wonder, why was he doing in the middle of the road? Was he having plans to try to break in? My mom and dad were confused by what his actions were, but I could tell his intentions were probably not good. So this happened to one of my friends, which we'll call him Jerry for the sake of this story. Now, Jerry used to live in a farm back when he was a kid, and he had moved there ever since after college, as he wanted to move in with his girlfriend. But this happened sometime maybe when he was about maybe 15 or 16 years old, and it was way back when he lived in a countryside. This happened to him at least probably in 2004 or perhaps 2005, and he told me this when I was maybe 15, as he told me this story that happened to him because I had something that similar that happened. As that is another story, Jerry had told me that he was left home alone by his parents in the summer of 2004. Jerry was just playing what seemed to be on his his Nintendo SNES. And of course, he did have some video games at the time. As he was playing some video games while being home alone, he heard someone or something knocking on the door. At first, Jerry was confused, thinking that maybe his parents were home, but how would they be at home as the dad was at work and the mom was busy out doing her usual things, like grocery shopping and that? Jerry got up to see if anyone was at the door, but when he opened the door, there was nobody there. Confusing as Jerry was, he ended up going outside, but he couldn't see anything amongst the tall crops. He was isolated from the town for most of the part, as it was in the countryside, and it would take at least 20 minutes to get to town, maybe 10 depending on if you take the highway or if you take the long way. Jerry looked over to see that there was some figure standing around the tall crops, or at least a tall field that hadn't been used. Jerry was confused at why the person was there, but since he was home alone, he couldn't really call his grandparents, as this was way before they had cell phones. This was back in the day before cell phones became a real big popular thing. Jerry put on his boots and even his coat, as it was around a little chilly time at the time. It was a really decent but cold day, so Jerry stepped outside and walked over towards the boy. The boy looked about maybe 7 or 8 years old. He said, where are your parents? Jerry asked the boy, but the boy gave no response. He just whimpered and cried. Jerry then took the boy's hand and led him out of the field, when all of a sudden, someone walked up and called out, "Hey, what are you doing with my son?" Jerry obviously was confused and looked at the boy. He asked the boy if it was his dad, which he shook his head no. All of a sudden, the man walked up to Jerry and said that his son had wandered off. But Jerry knew that this guy was lying, as he was hiding something behind his back, probably something that Jerry was not supposed to see. Jerry picked up the boy and they ran all the way back to Jerry's house where he locked the door. The man was walking over towards the house. Jerry hid the boy upstairs and called the police, as it would take a while for the officer to arrive. Jerry remained in the bedroom with locked and trying his best to keep the boy as quiet as he can while talking to the operator. Of course, it wasn't long until there was a smash of the window. There was glass breaking what seemed to be from the back door. The man had somehow broke in. Jerry was trying to calm the boy down as much as he can, but it wasn't long until sirens were in the distance, just as the man was climbing up the stairs, with people shouting police. It wasn't long until the knocking on the door happened at Jerry's room, and it was a male officer. Of course, the man was in handcuffs, and Jerry explained that this little boy came to him at the field, and he was the one who knocked on the door. Jerry looked at the boy and asked him if he was the one who knocked at the door, which he said yes, as he needed help, as soon as he found Jerry's house, he knocked on the door and took off, as he was set up by this young man. This man that Jerry encountered had to be maybe in his mid-30s, and apparently the police discovered that he had a knife. He had planned to kill Jerry right in the middle of the field. Jerry's parents returned home shortly after that, and when the man was taken away, and Jerry had never been home alone since then. He was not been paranoid about being home alone ever since he went to college, as he never had this incident happen again. The young boy apparently was abducted by this man from his parents about maybe a few months ago, and they're just so glad that the boy was all right. Chances were, if Jerry had not gone outside to find the boy, chances are the boy would not have been found, and the one person who tried to murder Jerry would have got away scot-free. Every time I tell Jerry about this story that he told me, and every time he tells about it to someone else, he does get chills every time when he thinks about it. And to that creepy guy, let's hope Jerry does not meet him again. This took place when I was about maybe 19 or 20 years old. This happened sometime, I guess you could say, in 2018. I was home alone one night with my brother, as my mom was out doing her errands and my dad was out with his friends. I was basically home alone, mainly with my brother. I had some stuff to keep myself busy by playing on Xbox, chat with friends on Discord, and etc. I was chatting with one of my friends on Discord one night when all of a sudden I heard someone or something opening up my bedroom door. It was at nighttime and I was quite confused as to why my bedroom door was opening. I went over to close it, but it wasn't long until it slowly opened again. Strange as I was thinking of it, I thought maybe my brother was just playing a game on me. He usually does this when he's in my room, even though he's not supposed to. He was pretty young at the time, so he does break rules. At that point, I walked over to see my brother was asleep in his room. He was obviously really tired, as this was during a school night. I opened the door, but I looked to see that there was nobody there. This obviously confused me, as my brother was asleep and there was no one else home but me. I walked over to my bed and I looked around my room. There was nobody there, so I'm assuming it might have been the wind, but it wasn't windy outside, so I know that couldn't be it. I went to bed, but it wasn't until 1 in the morning when all of a sudden I heard someone or something walking around the room. This obviously confused me, as I was alone that day and my parents should have been home, but my parents weren't home that day for some reason. I walked over to what seemed to be the living room. I saw a shadowy figure of someone or something lingering across on the guest bed that we have downstairs in the basement. I nearly crapped myself as I hurried upstairs and shut my bedroom door and I remained there with my lamp on for the rest of the night. I was too horrified to go back downstairs. When I told my mom about what happened and my dad, they walked downstairs, but they couldn't find anyone or anybody down there. This was kind of strange, as I'm thinking what I saw that night while I was home alone was completely paranormal. This happened to my friend, which we'll call her Charlie, and she honestly was home alone one night. She was working on a project what seemed to be for school, and she was 18 years old. She took a victory lap when she was on her final year of high school, is because she wanted to get some extra credits, as there was a college that she really wanted to go to, but needed at least certain courses to pass. As Charlie was on her laptop one night, she was working on something for school. She was alone in her house as her younger brother, who was in sophomore year at the time, was out partying with his friends while her older brother had moved out. It wasn't very long though, as Charlie was doing her usual things on her laptop, working on a school project. Her parents had left her home alone as they were both working. The dad was doing the night shift and her mom was out doing her usual job. Charlie honestly gets really creeped out when she thinks about it. She was alone in her room, working on a project while doing her usual thing at school for school. And in other words, she needed this really important grade in order to get to a college that she really wanted to go to. She was doing something for biology. At that point, as she was doing her usual thing, she heard the front door open. Confused as she was, she thought that maybe her parents had returned early, or perhaps her younger brother had returned home. So she closed up her laptop and walked down to go see if her brother was home. But when she got halfway down the stairs, she saw that the front door was wide open, and there was a man. The man looked to be in his 40s, and he wasn't looking very friendly. Charlie was confused as she had no idea who this man was, so she was obviously pretty creeped out. This man seemed to be maybe not looking at her, but it had what seemed to be a crowbar. Charlie was nearly freaking out as this guy had a crowbar and there was no chance that she could stop it if he was going to strike her. Charlie slowly went back upstairs and went to her bedroom and locked it, where she called the police. While she was on the phone, the man walked upstairs to her bedroom ever so slowly and then searched the bedrooms. First he opened the parents' room, the older brother's room, or aka guest room, the younger brother's room, then eventually the bathroom. And Charlie was nearly crying as the operator told her to stay calm. "He's coming here," she said. And it wasn't long until the man reached to Charlie's bedroom, where he knocked on the door. "I know you're in here," he said. Just as he was about to break down the door, police sirens were heard in the distance, where the guy dropped the crowbar and he ran out of the house. The police had no time to catch him as he ran too fast. It wasn't long until when Charlie looked outside to see the man had gone down the street and into the woods, never to be seen again. Charlie walked downstairs to see the police and told them exactly what happened and the story. Charlie had never been so scared in her life, but what was really surprising was that they had no idea why the man came in with a crowbar. But ever since then, Charlie had never seen that man again in that neighborhood, and she's glad she moved there, as this man could have maybe harmed her or do something much worse if she had not noticed him from her bedroom window.